if everyone would go ahead and come in the auditorium, we'll go ahead and get started on our Bible class. We've still got Jesus on the mountainside, still preaching his Sermon on the Mount, and we're going to be there for a few more weeks. Last week we talked about anger, we talked about murder of the heart, we talked about lust, and this week we're going to try to cover maybe about 3 topics. We're going to start out with the topic of marriage and divorce. If you have your Bibles, turn to Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 24. Verses 1 through 4. Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 1 through 4. When a man takes a wife and marries her, if then she finds no favor in his eyes, because he has found some indecency in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, and she departs out of his house, and if she goes and becomes another man's wife, and the latter man hates her and writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, or if the latter man dies who took her to be his wife, then the former husband who sent her away may not take her again to be his wife after she has been defiled, for that is an abomination before the Lord. The main thing that I want you to get out of this, and it's not the last section, but it's the first section. During or under the Mosaic Law, God allowed divorce. And from what I've studied and from what I heard, it's pretty simple to get a divorce under the Mosaic Law. I heard a preacher one time say, if she burned your toast, you could get a divorce. And I don't know if it was really that simple, but a man could divorce his wife. We get to the New Testament, and Jesus is teaching about marriage and about divorce. Let's look at Matthew chapter 5, verse 31 and 32. It was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. That's what I just read to you in Deuteronomy. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the grounds of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So Jesus is trying to show these people what God really intended from the beginning of the world. He intended for a man and a woman who got married to remain a man and a woman in marriage. The scholars, the major belief that was held by most scribes and most Pharisees of their interpretation of the word uncleanness, they think it meant just something that was unpleasing to the man. They didn't really build into that phrase anything that was significant. They thought they could just get the divorce for any reason. The other belief was that this referred to some kind of moral uncleanliness. Jesus is is trying to teach people the sanctity. He's trying to teach people the purpose. He's trying to teach people how important it is to be faithful to one another and to have this institution of marriage. God intended two people, man and a woman, when they get married to become one flesh. He did not want anyone else to interfere with that relationship. Today, and I didn't look up the statistics for marriage and divorce, but it is, I know in the past I've looked it up, and it would shock you the ratio of divorces to marriage in the United States, even in Oklahoma, in Muskogee County. It would shock you. People get married now, and it's kind of like buying a car. If for some reason down the road I don't like that car, I'll just get rid of it and get another car. And there won't be any problems. There won't be any ramifications of that. It'll just be like getting something different. In my job, yes, Mark? He does. God hates divorce. There's a few things in the Bible that as you read through there, it talks about things that God hates. He hates like a lying tongue. There's different things that's listed that God hates. And it's interesting, and I'm glad Mark pointed it out. God hates divorce. It's not something like, well, I did this or I did that, and he hates it. He absolutely despises it. And now the sin, we know that the sin of adultery, it is pardonable, okay, but there are ramifications of divorce. I do a lot of family law in my practice. And it is unbelievably so stressful to me to do divorces. You see two people, and of course I only see one side of it, but you see the nature of what a divorce does. So much of the time I think, well, God hated divorce. He hates divorce because it's adultery, it's fornication, there's those big reasons he hates divorce. There are so many reasons that divorce is wrong, and God knew about those reasons. I see couples who have children that's going through a divorce. I see couples who have babies that go through a divorce. I see couples who have children that are young, that's 3, 4, 5 years old, 6 years old, that go through a divorce, that's old enough to know that mom and dad's not together, that's old enough to know that I spend this night at dad's house and I spend this night at mom's house. I see children that are old enough to know that mom and dad are bickering back and forth, that mom and dad takes the children and uses those children as weapons against the ex-spouse. There's some things that you just would not believe that I've heard through the years that have to do or has to do with divorce. God knew that divorces were bad and that they are bad. I just got through doing one, and the children are like 13, 15, and 17. And they certainly know what's going on. they certainly know what Dad has done and what Dad continues to do. In a divorce in Oklahoma, there's different outcomes of a divorce depending on the evidence that you have in the case. The judge makes a decision who gets custody, who gets visitation. The judge makes a decision on whether or not you can even see your children. This most recent case that I did, where the children were 13, 15, and 17, the judge would not let the father see the children without being supervised. Had to have supervised visitation because of the nature of what he did in life. He drank, he was abusive, and he just wasn't a good person. And so there's all kinds of issues with divorce, and there's nothing good about a divorce. And it happens. I understand it happens sometimes when the other party does not have a choice. You can't force someone to stay married to you. There's some people that still think that. I've had people come to me, whether it's a woman or a man, and they say, well, my spouse told me, he said, I'm not going to give you a divorce. Well, that's not the way it works. You can get a divorce if you want to, but there are times when you can't help and you can't keep your marriage together. Now, we have God's grace to cover us in situations, even for those who make mistakes themselves, that causes a marriage to fall apart. You can always have forgiveness of that sin. Romans 6, 1 through 2 in Romans 6, Paul says, what shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. How shall we that we are dead in sin live any longer therein? So we do have to change our lives. We can't continue doing those things, but there is forgiveness. Paul's talking about the grace that abounds and that is present for situations that we might find ourselves in because of previous marriages, because of previous things in our lives. So God loves you and God does forgive you, but God hates divorce. I always tell the story about when you go to court, and I see that Chris is here and James is here. I don't see Pat, and Rob's not here. But we have 5 attorneys that go to this church that I know of. And so we've all been in these situations before where you're in court and you leave the courtroom, somebody wins and somebody loses. And I've been on both sides of that equation, but I've been on some of these divorce sides. When you leave the courtroom, nobody wins. And I have seen that so many times. It's more with the children. Property is property. You either lose your property, you lose some of it, but you go on down the road. But when you have children in a divorce, it is a loss for both sides. You know, I'll go home and Michelle asked me, well, how'd your case go today? And I said, well, the judge said I won. But you go out in the hall and you see the children crying. You see dad cussing. You see mama crying. And I tell her, I said, the judge said I won, but I don't feel like I won. there's no winners. So God hates divorce. And Jesus was trying to tell them, look, this is who we really are as God's children. We're not to get divorced. We're to stay together. So he was teaching on that. And it was a change from the Mosaic Law. So that's part of the Sermon on the Mount. Any thoughts or comments before we go further off of that topic? Yes. If you couldn't hear that, James says he retired from being attorney, and he does not want you to judge him as being an attorney. He's our town administrator. But from time to time, I call James and say, hey, James, I got this situation. This is what I think. What do you think? So James will always be an attorney. You can't take that away from him. And let me, since attorneys are able to argue back and forth, I want you to tell this congregation, have you surrendered your bar license? No. But you will, though. You will. That's one of those things I'll probably pay for. If God lets me live till I'm 90 years old, I'll probably pay for it every year, because even though I don't use it, it's like I work too hard to get that. I don't want to lose it. So James is still an attorney. I don't care what he tells you, okay? It's funny the next deal is talking about oaths and speaking the truth. So, James is a segue right into that. So you got to listen to what an attorney says. Every word counts. Chapter 5, verses 33 through 37. Again, you have heard it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from the evil. It's funny how we as people sometimes want to add to what we say to try to make you believe what we say is the truth. It even starts out when we're small children. I'm going to say something I bet you a lot of you haven't thought of or haven't heard in a long time. And I don't know Ronnie Keeling, he's got some miles on him. I don't know if Ronnie even did this when he was young, but little children, they do this. They'll tell the other friend, there's Ronnie, he's old too. They'll tell the other friend, they'll tell him a story, and they said, yes, it really happened. I pinky swear it happened. Do y'all remember that? Pinky swear. Well, if you pinky swear, then that made what you said truth. And I was thinking about that as I went through this lesson. Jesus is speaking to adults, but even kids somehow in their minds, they know I've got to put something on top of this statement to make it true. So we pinky swear and it becomes truth. An oath is a solemn promise. It's often invoking a divine witness, such as God, regarding one's future actions or behavior. We see in court, we see where people they hold their hand up and they swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God. We see where individuals, whether it's the president or whether it could be a political office holder, when Chris and I at one time both become DAs, we had to take an oath of office. There are some people that I have seen through the years when you're a courtroom practicing attorney. A lot of attorneys don't ever go to the courtroom, but when you do a lot of litigation, you see this all the time. You see witnesses take the stand and they will take that oath. I have seen people that are so conscious about that they will refuse to raise their hand and take an oath to tell the truth. And in Oklahoma, they allow judges to do an affirmation. If somebody refuses or says they can't take an oath because of their religious convictions, then the judge will ask them, do you affirm to tell the truth? I always thought that there's not a lot of difference in that, but people will affirm to tell the truth and testify. Pharisees tried to convince others about their telling the truth about swearing or about telling or taking oaths. They may swear by heaven or swear by God or swear by the temple, swear by Jerusalem, that this is true what I'm saying. And what Jesus was talking about here is you don't need to do all that. You know, one of the 10 Commandments is thou shall not lie. And Jesus is conveying to these listeners, he goes, you don't need to put anything on top of this. You don't need to try to convince somebody that you're telling the truth by taking an oath or swearing by something to convince them that you are telling the truth. If you say yes and you are a Christian, that should be good enough. If you say no and you are a Christian, that should be good enough. Whatever story that you tell, whatever you say, if you are a Christian, then that's the truth. You don't need to swear by something or take an oath to make yourself believable. And Jesus was trying to drive home that concept. And I like the way he says it. Let what you say be simply yes or no. And he says if you say anything more than that, that's from the devil. And so, yes, Mike.
Paul said, I think your truth is not my witness when he was trying to defend himself. Is that wrong?
No, not necessarily. And there are oaths that you can take that are not wrong. I guess what I should have said is this swearing and this oath-taking that Jesus is talking about here is about verbiage or about things that you say to convince others that you are not lying. You can go through the Old Testament and you can find men of God that take oaths. So it's a different type of oath that Jesus is teaching about here on the Sermon on the Mount. It's where it's almost kind of like saying, well, you may think I'm lying, and I may be lying, but this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to swear by heaven that I'm not lying. And so then you're going to believe me. And that's the only way you're going to believe me. You're not going to believe me because I'm a Christian. You're not going to believe me because I keep the 10 Commandments and I don't lie. The only reason you're going to believe me is because I swear by something to tell the truth. And so I've probably not really answered that question for you, Mike, in a best way to answer it. But there are oaths that's different than that. Dan, could you help me out on that?
Well, in Hebrews 6, God desired to show more convincingly to the heirs of the promise the unchangeable character of his purpose. He guaranteed it with an oath. God put himself under oath. What Jesus is talking about here is you're lying to somebody, you're trying to convince them that you're telling them the truth by saying, well, I swear by the gold on the altar.
Right, right.
You're lying. And he's saying, don't lie.
Yes.
Just tell the truth.
So for those that you might not have heard, Dan read a passage where God took an oath. So it's just like I said, you're trying to convince somebody that you're not lying, and that's what Jesus said don't do. Leviticus 19:12, ye shall not swear by my name falsely. And so that's what Jesus is talking about. Don't take the Lord's name in vain. You know, a lot of people think, well, I didn't use the curse word with God's name, so I don't take God's name in vain. Well, you can take God's name in vain by using His name to justify something. And so that would be a way to do it. And the old law says don't take His name in vain. It's something that's very holy. As we know, one time, the Jews wouldn't even say the name because it was so holy. And we have gotten away from that in our common language, and people don't think anything about saying, "Oh Lord," or "Lordy," or just using God's name just in common settings. But that's really taking His name in vain. Any thoughts on that?
On that comment, on that thought, it's a very common thing you hear over and over and over from the media and everybody that you talk to these days. Oh my God, oh my God. Everybody says it all the time. That is taking His name in vain.
That's exactly right. When you say, "Oh my God," that is a vain form of using the name of God. We need to look and give respect to the holiness of God. Let's talk about something that's very, very hard for me. Doing something willingly, doing something that you don't have to do, that you don't want to do, and that really you shouldn't have to do it. 38 through 42. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. Under the Mosaic law, there was a get even clause. If you do something to me, I get to get even. I get to do what it is to you. And that was under the old law. And Jesus is saying, look, we are a changed people. We're not going to do that anymore. We're going to love each other. Not only are we going to love each other, we are going to love people when they do things to us, like when they sue us. We're going to love that person when they hurt us. We're going to love that person. And what out of this passage, what I really, really like is this about going the second mile. I grew up with that phrase, hey, that guy goes the second mile, or you need to go the second mile. And of course, when I was very young, I didn't have a clue what that meant. I just meant it was something good. You go the second mile. And during this time period when the Holy Land was under the rule of the Romans, a Roman soldier could compel you to carry his pack or carry his belongings for 1 mile. And you had to do that. There was no choice. Do you have a question or a comment? There was no choice. You had to be submissive to that Roman soldier and carry his pack. But after that mile was up, you were through. You did not have to you didn't have to take another step. That's all you had to do. And if try to put this in context, let's say that Russia did take us over, and a Russian soldier came up to you, Jackie, and said, you've got to carry my stuff for 1 mile. I mean, how would that make you feel? That you had to do something for somebody that was in control of you. That would really, really upset most people. Well, Jesus is telling you, you talk about counterculture. Jesus is telling these people, you know, I know about you carrying this pack for 1 mile. I know about that. And I know how you don't like it. You know, and I bet you they thought he was going to say, you don't have to do that anymore. And Jesus says, guess what? Don't just carry it 1 mile. Carry it 2 miles. Go the second mile. And if we do that in our lives, think about the people recognizing who we are, recognizing Jesus living in our lives. We can tell people all the time. We can preach to people all the time. But we can show people more. And I think I've told this before, the very first trial that I ever did in my life, it was one of those deals that was a bad case. Chris and James, they understand that when I say it's a bad case, but you got to try it anyway. And I was the lowest assistant DA on the totem pole. And so I got this bad case to go try. And the guy that I was prosecuting, he was guilty. He was guilty of sin, but the evidence was just not that great, but I had to try it. And my witness, he did this all the way through the trial. I'd ask him a question, and I didn't know he was going to do this, but I'd ask him a question, and he'd go, now, I got to tell the truth about this. And then he'd tell his answer. And 2 minutes down the road, I'd ask him a question. He goes, now, I want to tell the truth about this. And he'd give his answer. And, of course, I wound up losing the trial. And one of the jurors come up to me after it was over with. And he said, Mr. Moore, he said, you know, we thought he was guilty, but he had a hard time telling the truth, because every time you'd ask him a question, he'd say, well, now, I want to tell the truth about this. And so there was somebody that you question, what kind of guy is he? Well, if we go the second mile, the community will see what kind of people we are. And it's not just because we say, I'm a Christian, that doesn't prove anything. It's how they see you. Okay, y'all have a good week. We're going to even talk next time about loving the enemies that we have. That'll be 2 weeks from today. We've got the guest speaker next Sunday.